Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information in the many facets in the world of natural living. And our topic for today is probably kind of a surprise, but yet it certainly falls into the realm of natural. And we will be talking today with our guest, Bill Broadbent, and he's an edible insect specialist, which is certainly an unusual topic, but he's been involved in this study actually for many years and has visited many conferences that are specifically focused on having edible insects available, which of course are a common food source in most of the world. It is called entomophagy, and he's been to many entomophagy conferences for many, many years, and he is considered an expert in the industry. So thank you so much for joining us today, Bill.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity.
Now, this, of course, I'm sure some people have never heard of. I saw that you were doing information about this, edible insects, and I did see not so long ago on a cooking channel, and there was a chef who was showing all kinds of recipes that he did with insects. So he might have been also involved in the same conferences that you've been in. What does that word entomophagy mean?
Well, it's generally pronounced entomophagy, and it basically just means people that eat insects. And we kind of joke, especially when we're in, school groups and things like that, that when you say you're an entomophagist, people think that you have a degree.
So what it is a study about the fact that humans have been eating insects throughout history. Is that not right?
That's correct. And in fact, most of the world still does. We don't seem, too familiar with it, but it's only the United States, Canada, Europe, and Australia, basically, that don't consider insects part of their diet. And our southern neighbor, Mexico, has almost 200 insects that they consider food. It's a, pre-Hispanic traditional food. And it's also a trend right now. A lot of high-end restaurants in Mexico City are bringing back esmoles and humiles, chapulines, things like that.
So let's just choose one of those, because maybe people are not even familiar with the words. You threw them out as if we're an audience where everyone's familiar with those things. So choose one of those dishes, and this is right in our neighbor Mexico, and explain what might be in there.
Well, chapulines are one of my favorites, and one of the jokes is that we go down to Mexico and we'll be sitting at a bar having a beer and drinking these spicy peanuts, and somebody will say, "Hey, did you know those are chapulines, which are actually grasshoppers?" And all of a sudden we won't eat them anymore. But chapulines are one of the most common insects. They're a smaller grasshopper that are spiced, not always spicy. There's a wide variety of ways to prepare them. And Adabatos and Sazanatos is two that I like a lot. And one is spicy, Sazanatos, one is not. But they taste great. I kind of joke that the hardest insect to eat is your first one. Once you get past that, and I remember how hard it was, but once you get past that, it's a whole new culinary experience.
Now, I also remember going back in time when I was young, there was actually a big trend here in the United States about eating, I guess they were ants that were in chocolate and grasshoppers also that were in chocolate. So I remember that as, it was kind of a fad.
Yeah, almost anything in chocolate tastes great, but chocolate-covered insects are definitely, we have what's called a cricket crunch bar, and it's a chocolate bar with crickets in it, and it tastes a lot like, a Hershey's Crunch bar, but you get the protein and you get the omega-3 and, B12, all the different vitamins. Insects are basically, little vitamin pills.
Well, that's something to talk about. One point that you had in your introduction in terms of, what we'd be speaking about today, which I was surprised about, is that you mentioned that vegetarians would be interested in this as a source of protein, although I don't see how that's the case, because vegetarians usually don't want to consume animals. They're into just using plant source food.
Well, the vegans are a little bit different than vegetarians, and we don't get a lot of vegans. But vegetarians tend to be a little more concerned about the humane treatment of animals. And insects are raised humanely. For example, crickets love living in compact groups, and they would rather be packed together. So they can be raised humanely. They're environmentally friendly. They can be raised vertically in old warehouses rather than having to deforest the Amazon, so we have room for grass for beef and that sort of thing. And insects are a real animal protein. So they have all the essential amino acids. They have B12, which is difficult for vegetarians to get. They've got omega-3, or actually a perfect, preferred balance of omega-3, 6, versus we get a ton of omega-6. So there's a lot of reasons why vegetarians and bodybuilders are another group that we get a lot of because of the real animal protein.
So you're talking about a lot of reasons why maybe this shouldn't be such a really foreign concern if you're talking about edible insects as a serious food source.
Oh, yeah. And again, most of the world, already considers insects part of our diet. And I like to point out that one of the farms that I work with in Thailand, the woman that runs the farm mentioned that her kids, when they go out and they want to celebrate, they like to have steak because it's a status symbol. And so, basically this is one of the reasons that I started getting into it. And I'll get back to my story in a second. But, in the next 50 years, or by the time my kids are my age, there's going to be half again as many people on the planet. Meat production is going to have to double to triple, and our planet just can't handle it. So we need an alternative, and insects are one of them. So back to the story, she was saying that her kids go out and they like to have steak. Well, we're making steak the status symbol all around the world. And if here in the United States, we start making insects a big deal, then around the rest of the world, the younger generation will see that as a positive thing as well. And we can start promoting that rather than beef. Beef is very destructive on our planet, not to mention the inhumanity of many of the ways that we raise a lot of animal agriculture, chicken and pigs as well.
So going back in time, what made you develop an interest in this? Think about yourself as Bill the little boy, let's say.
Well, we actually, I spent most of my life in New Mexico. My kids were born there, and going into Mexico was something we did often. And so we were aware of it, but not quite as interested until my son, at around 12 years old in 2013, the UN's FAO came out with a report on how we need to start adding insects to our diet. And he asked me about it, and he joked that I gave him a dad answer. So he kept looking into it, and he kept coming back and saying, did you know? And, the health benefits, the environmental benefits, the nutritional benefits, and all of that. And so for fun, we put up a website, and people started saying, hey, where can we get these? And over the next year or so, we started bringing them in on a small scale. But in 2015, my sister, who was working for Condé Nast at the time, decided she wanted to quit. And we incorporated in 2015 and started Entosense. And it was early enough, we even got the domain edibleinsects.com. That's how uncommon it was, even back then. But, still not super common. But that's what we're fighting for, is to bring it into the mainstream.
So this became, wow, that's a very interesting family story. So from your son mentioning it, it actually sort of organically grew into a family-run business.
Yeah, and he still considers himself an ento-vegan. And my daughter actually at the time started taking its samples to school. Silkworm pupae, as terrible as that sounds, was a favorite among her and some of her friends. And we were all
tell us what that is in other words. What is that?
Well, it's just as the silkworm turns into a moth, they pupate, and it looks like a little cocoon. But it actually tastes really good, and it's super nutritious. And in Asia, it's a very common insect to be eaten. And it also doesn't really look a whole lot like an insect when you see it in a soup or something. But a lot of these it's more commonly used as a powder or, crunched up and added to different things. You can use cricket powder and make chocolate chip cookies that are high in protein.
Without actually seeing crickets in it, for those who don't like that. Well, let me remind our listeners that you're listening today to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and today my guest is Mr. Bill Broadbent, and we're talking about why edible insects make sense. And there are so many reasons. And, you didn't even give me that as a link to give out in terms of your website. Did you say it's called edibleinsects.com?
Yes, our corporate site is entosense.com.
Right.
And the retail site is edibleinsects.com.
Okay, that's a good one for people to know in case they want to look into this a little more closely. Now, is there any difference between just like going outside and grabbing some insects that you find and preparing them for food versus getting them in a way that you provide them?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the insects themselves, there's not much difference, but we do have to caution people against wild harvesting in areas where people might be spraying pesticides, especially in backyards and gardens, and of course, near farms. But if you're far enough away and they're not a migratory insect, like grasshoppers and locusts are a little bit different, but roly-polies, even earthworms, lots of beetles, they're edible. And you can collect them as long as, again, you're away from anything that might be, it's mostly on the outside. And that's the other interesting thing about insects is that we don't share a lot of diseases with insects. If they bite you, sting you, or again, something's on the outside, even like salmonella or something, that's different. But, there's no bird flu type thing. There's no swine flu, anything like that, because the pathogens just can't transfer from an insect to us.
And so, that discussion that you just had about possibly if you did a self-harvest of your own insects in your own yard, even if you don't spray, your neighbor might spray. The insects don't just stay in one exact location. But why would that differ if they were to purchase, insect-based food from a company like yours? How would you know that those absolutely don't have pesticide residue?
Well, we have to buy from established farms, and they go through the same thing. We started actually growing some insects ourselves when we were inspected by the USDA, registered with the FDA and all of that. And we still are inspected, but we grew too fast to grow them ourselves. However, I should mention that you can grow them on your own. You can grow them in your basement. You can use, leftovers from your dinner to grow crickets, mealworms. Well, mealworms actually like oats and things like that. But there's a side note I should mention real quick. Black soldier fly larva is getting real big, and this is a little more for feed. But black soldier flies will eat twice their weight every single day in food waste, and that can be food waste from restaurants and grocery stores or brewers' waste that would regularly go into our landfills and create greenhouse gases. Instead, it's food for the black soldier fly larva, and that larva is then used as feed for everything from salmonoid to pigs and chickens. But at the same time, you can even do that at home. You can have a little bin and you put a ramp on it, throw your leftovers in there, the black soldier fly larvae eat it, and when they get to the stage where they want to pupate, they want to leave the colony. So they climb up that ramp, fall into a dish, and your chickens come over and have a free meal that's high protein and about as healthy as you can get.
Well, certainly when I raised chickens, they kind of always ate insects, but they found them on their own outside.
Right.
And it is you're eating it in the end anyway. So I think this is a really fascinating topic. Let's tell our listeners more about the nutritional value. You ran through it really quickly, but I think a lot of people would be very interested in the fact that they do tend to have quite a bit of nutrition. And I imagine different species have different variety of nutrients.
Not only that, they also depend on what you feed them. For example, Tufts University did a quick study, and I think they're going to go deeper into this, but if they feed the crickets carrots, they'll come out high in vitamin A, and it's bioavailable vitamin A. That's one of the things about eating insects is most of these are very bioavailable, which sometimes when you're taking different pills or powders or whatever, a large percentage of what you're taking isn't actually being digested. It's just going straight through you. But, again, it's a real animal protein, all 9 essential amino acids. It's prebiotic fiber, which we have a hard time getting. You can get prebiotic fiber out of mushrooms and a few things like that, including shellfish, but we never eat, sometimes you eat the tails of shrimp, but you don't eat the shell of a lobster and that sort of thing. And prebiotic fiber is the nutrition for probiotics. So everybody's like adding more probiotics to their diet, but if you don't have enough prebiotics, it's kind of like going back to the chickens. One of the scientists I've talked to mentioned, well, it's kind of like having 10 chickens and saying, okay, I want to have 20 chickens, but not thinking that you have to increase the feed. You're going to go back to 10 chickens or less because they'll die off. So prebiotic fiber is very important. It's 5 times to 10 times the antioxidants of orange juice. I mean, there's just a ton of antioxidants. There's vitamin B12, again, something that vegetarians have a hard time getting. It's the ideal omega-3/6 balance. It's got riboflavin, biotin. There's more calcium than milk. There's more iron than spinach, magnesium, zinc, copper, manganese. I mean, sometimes I think we should say it might be something that's missing from our diet. It's an ancient food. Most of the world still eats it, and we don't. So, again, it's healthy as you can get.
It certainly is. And I'd like to remind you that you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. And you can always listen live or online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio or many of the other platforms. And you can always email us at whpc@ncc.edu. And we also post on our archives information. Not only can you listen to our show, like if you're listening today and you find this pretty fascinating about the concept of the fact that insects are a major food source around the world and you want to share it with someone, well, they can listen to our archives. And we always also have live links to our guests' website and contact information. So, Bill, you ran through those nutrients. When you think about it, that's true because very often people, especially who are vegan, do have a number of nutritional deficiencies. And in our practice in natural medicine, and I really think this should happen in every medicine, conventional medicine, is we test nutrient levels. We find things like low levels, both of omega-3 fatty acids, as well as B12, as well as carnosine. I know carnosine is in red meat. I'm wondering if it is in insects. You might not know that, but it is high in many of the amino acids.
Right. I'm not sure about carnosine, and I should look it up. I just wrote it down.
Because like when you say essential amino acids, that word essential and used before the word amino acids really is only talking then about 3 specific amino acids. So like those ones that our bodies cannot make. And the BCAAs like valine, isoleucine, and leucine. So I'm just wondering, and that's something I'm sure you could look into and find out for your own knowledge, because carnosine is something that is markedly missing in most vegan diets, not necessarily vegetarians, because like you said, vegetarian is such a broad term. People can say that they're vegetarian just because they don't eat red meat, let's say. So they'll say they're vegetarian, but they eat meat, milk, they eat chicken, even they eat fish, or they just eat fish or whatever. That's a broad word. But when someone says vegan, they usually, like you shared, don't want to be involved in eating animals, so they, in fact, may not want to also consume insects if they consider them. They are little animals, right? They're not plants.
Correct. Yes.
So that's, one part of it. But I think it's really almost such a surprise that so much of the world actually incorporates insects regularly into their diet. Now, what do you mean in terms of the farming practices that seem to be a lot more environmentally friendly than, let's say, raising cattle? I mean, raising cattle, there's so much about how terrible that is and how we're actually cutting down rainforests, which provides the oxygen for the world. to breed more cattle, which then increases methane, which is one of the major causes of global warming, and on and on.
Right. And as I mentioned before, you can raise insects in an old warehouse. You don't have to use, clear land for it. But at the same time, insects basically get a lot of their water from food. So they're using very little water, very little land. And as far as the greenhouse gases, it's a minute amount in comparison. So, environmentally, they're sustainable, and again, humane. It's good all around. And actually, to bring the whole cycle to a complete, whatever word I'm missing right now, also their frass, which is what you call insect poop, is a fertilizer. It's high in nitrogen, and it's a really great fertilizer. Their exoskeleton that they shed, and then also when we prepare the insects, we generally, like if you buy crickets from us, we've cleaned most of the legs and wings from them. Well, when people start gardens, if they sprinkle the exoskeletons into their gardens, it makes the plants germinate a little bit faster because they're a little bit worried about insects being around. So they come up a little bit stronger. And that's something that they're also researching right now at Cornell.
So what is vertical growing? What does that mean, vertically grown?
It means that you can grow it, and like I said, in an old warehouse, you can grow level by level above each other. They can be bins you get from Lowe's or Home Depot that are stacked on top of each other if you want. And, this is something that's happening. When we talk about this, there's a company called Aspire. They have a 20,000 square foot farm that's outside of Austin, Texas. They're building another one up in Canada. There's a 60,000 square foot farm in Canada, just raising crickets alone. And on another side, it's also going into the pet food right now. It's another way to, dogs and cats really don't care where they get their protein as long as it tastes good. And so if we can replace the beef with crickets, that's a great thing.
So when they're being grown that way commercially, like you said, in a vertical situation or in a warehouse, then they're not getting, the fresh air and light they're used to either in the wild state. So how does that impact them? And does that make colonies perhaps get, have some kind of disease problem?
There is a problem with disease that'll wipe out whole colonies. That's something they have to be very careful of. But that's also one of the things about insects is that if they're not happy, they won't breed. So if they're not breeding, you're not going to have a farm very long. So crickets are an easy one because if you don't hear any chirping, then there's something wrong. Crickets chirp because they're happy and they want to have sex. And, so you really have to give them that environment. You have to give them the fresh air. You have to give them. They do give them water, but in a sense, they get most of their water from feed. And again, feed, if you're growing at home, it can be leftovers. And if you don't have enough leftovers, it can be weeds from your garden. It's natural. And it's, like I said, a really nice cycle.
So they're saying if you are self-growing a small colony, for home consumption, then it's pretty cost effective. And I imagine, is that being done in other places of the world where, access to food is not that plentiful? Yes.
And even right here in the United States, we still have some food security problems. So it would be easy for people to be growing crickets and mealworms and things like that for their own protein. I mean, everybody has gardens and, what you compost, a lot of what you compost can also be considered feed.
That's true. But I know it is getting to be very trendy. Like I said, I saw this chef on one of the television channels, and that's what he was doing, making all kinds of specialty dishes. So it's kind of catching on with chefs who might have a whole new food group to experiment with.
Yeah, and we like to point out the chefs are the answer, because if they don't taste good, I mean, a lot of people said, I tried a cricket. Well, I compare that to somebody handing you a lettuce leaf and saying, hey, what do you think about vegetables? I mean, there's, 2,000 different insects that we consider food, and every one of them tastes different. For chefs right now, we sell a lot of black ants because black ants have a really powerful citrus taste. You don't need very many, and it's a real compliment to any meal you're making. And they just, instead of lemon or lime, they'll use black ants. And they look really neat. And also, they have kind of their own word of mouth advertising factor where if somebody has a meal with black ants in it, you can be sure they're going to tell people about it and post about it. But, a lot of high-end Mexican restaurants are buying the chapulines and chicotanias, which are queen ants. We sell a lot of scorpions, but that does tend to be a little bit more novel. At one point in 1 month, we sold over 20,000 scorpions to Las Vegas, and they use them in shots. It's at $5 to add a scorpion to your shot, that sort of thing.
Oh my God.
That's a little,
So very interesting topic, because of the fact that we are having a food shortage in the world. So many people now are wandering around homeless and being immigrants and refugees. I mean, things are really spiraling in many directions, and the food system will be more and more stressed. It's an interesting topic, and I want to thank you so much for being our guest today.
Oh, well, again, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it and always enjoy talking about it.
We've been talking to Mr. Bill Broadbent, and you can go to his website. We have that available for you to just click on and visit. Right at the end of the show, you can go to Entosense, ENTOSENSE.com or edibleinsects.com. So thank you, listeners, for joining us once again for Herbally Yours, which is produced right here in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.